and I used to be in the CEP program. I left that right before the pandemic. But for many years, actually, that was how I got started here. Was first couple of years I was here was through what they used to call the outreach program, and so outside of CMCB, I teach at UNH and Stonehill colleges, and also at the Waldorf School in Lexington. So a lot of teaching, and then a lot of freelancing too. So busy.
Hi, my name is Hannah Lopez. I started out here at CMCB through the CEP program, teaching strings and songwriting. And this year I'm teaching mainly songwriting and music production at Excel High School and Early School. And outside CMCB, I'm a songwriter, composer, producer, and I just produce and make my own music and put it online for everybody.
Hello, my name is Anna Bradford. I have been the OBO teacher here at CMCB for 5 years. And over the past 2 years, I've also become the faculty instructional lead for the women's brass department. And I also started coordinating and helping manage our Boston Latin School satellite program. And for the last 2 years as well, I've been teaching a woodwinds class through our community engagement program at the Adams Elementary School in East Boston, which was fully virtual for an entire year, teaching 50 flutes and clarinets. And thankfully, we've been able to meet in person this year, which has been really fun. Outside of CMCB, I perform, I'm in a couple of regional orchestras, and I also play with a reed quintet. Shameless plug, we're actually performing right after this at 7 p.m. with this very location, so stick around. We have some really great music. Yeah, and I also teach for Boston Symphony Orchestras and a couple other music programs throughout Boston area.
We had a quick sound issue, and so some of the folks on Zoom actually couldn't hear the first two speakers, if that's okay.
Sure.
We're now just having you kind of speak through like a laptop microphone, actually, because the microphone that's here is having some trouble. So if the first two of you wouldn't mind reintroducing yourselves, and then maybe also just speaking up a little bit so that we can make sure folks can hear you.
Hello again. I'm Macky. I teach for the community engagement programs in CMS, CMS for piano. For CEP, I'm also the faculty instructional lead. And what else did I say? And for the last half year, I've been working with the Teaching Artist Training Institute, which works with teaching artists and just going through material that is necessary for music educators right now.
Great, and I'm Katie O'Reilly. I'm a voice teacher. I teach voice. Yeah, that's what I do.
Spoken like a true voice teacher. So we'll start off. Well, first I'll share with everyone. We talked a little bit about the CMS. That's our community music school. So for those of you who are not familiar with us, here in the building that we're in right now, this is our community music school, which functions like a very traditional community music school. And then we have another branch of our programs called CEP, which is our community engagement programs. And so you'll hear us go back and forth between CMS and CEP. Again, that's CMS is our internal programs. CEP is all of our external programs with our partners. We work in schools, we work with public schools, charter schools. We also work in health and human services organizations like Goodwill, Bayco. And so these are some of the things that we're describing when we say CEP. So I want to make sure that you understood what that meant before we launched into the first question. My first question for each of you, we'll go around the room and then I'll ask you questions individually. The first one around the room, there are these two terms that CMCB is using a lot. We're talking about being culturally inclusive, and we're also talking about learner-centered. And each one of you does things in both of those buckets in your actual work. So can you just tell me a little bit about what those terms actually mean to you when you hear culturally inclusive or learner-centered teaching? Well, why don't we start with you? What's up with you this time?
Yeah, so culturally inclusive teaching has two kind of different meanings to me. And the first meaning is focusing on the student's culture, that where that student is identifying and living and how they're interacting with, their environment. So in that case, one of the things that I'm doing at my East Boston school is Tony Beatrice, who's the head of Boston Public School Arts, created a band book for our students. And a lot of the songs were like kind of originally written, and they all have titles of locations or things from around Boston. So that part of it is, what culture is the student in and how can you reach them on their level? And the other part of that is making sure that the music that we are using in our classroom is representative of the world around us. Whether or not that's a culture that the students in that classroom identify with or not, it's important that we all learn about all the different cultures that are out there, especially since classical music, which is the world that I kind of live in more as an oboist, this is very kind of traditional classical Western music, which has been very exclusionary to voices of women and non-binary composers, and of course BIPOC composers as well. So those two aspects of culture inclusive music are both things that I'm working on keeping in my classroom. As far as learner-centered, that's something that I think a lot of us as teachers were already doing before we even really knew what it was. As musicians, like, as any sort of teacher, teaching is a labor of love, right? We're musicians, we're performers, but if we're choosing to teach, we're doing it because we like it. And one of the core tenets of my teaching philosophy is that, yes, I teach music, yes, I teach the oboe, but I teach people, I teach human beings. And it's really important for me to meet my students where they are and help them achieve their goals, as not my own goals, not putting them on a certain path or making them learn some type of repertoire, just, making sure that you're there for them. And as someone who does primarily private teaching, that's definitely like the absolute core tenet of my teaching principle in my room.
So teaching for the CEP program, the community engagement program, like focusing on what I do, which is songwriting and music production. Oftentimes the classrooms that I get are students who don't always opt into the class, so it's more like a general class that everybody has the opportunity to take to discover, maybe other sorts of interests or maybe new abilities or new, talents that they probably didn't know they had, or maybe they knew they had and they wanted to develop. So in this songwriting and music production class, I try to offer different kinds of material that the students both would understand, feel identified with, and even probably want to, if they don't understand it or they don't feel identified with, maybe they might feel curious about it and want to know more about it. So I've been working really hard on creating a list of resources that follows this, this like diversity and inclusivity that we're looking for. In terms of learner-centered teaching, I work with the students' strengths and with what I can see that they can develop further through the class. Like if there are students who are demonstrating that they are more interested in creating the music, like the instrumental part of a song, and they are having probably a little bit more of a hard time creating the lyrics, I let them just focus on the music instead. And on the lyrics part, I try to meet them where they are at. Like I always tell them there's no wrong topic that you can write about as long as it's school appropriate. And also appropriate for their age. So they come up with the most creative topics that we have never thought of. And I was giving an example recently about the student who chose the topic about potatoes. They wanted to just write a song about all the different kinds of food you can make with potatoes. So it's like, they were trying to be funny but I was like, yeah, like go for it. If you want to make a funny song, go ahead. And that's exactly what this class is for. So I just hope with the music, songwriting and music production class, like I tell them like, maybe some of you might want to pursue that in the future. Maybe some of you might not like maybe you might just be happy to experiment with it, but I just show it to themselves as an opportunity to learn about how music evolved into what it is now and all the different cultures that have influenced music as of what it is now, and to also discover new talents that they might have and push them to pursue those talents if they're interested.
Yeah, thank you. Karl, what are those words mean to you, Karl?
Well, I mean, actually, you guys said.
You took my first.
I really think that when I think of culturally inclusive, I guess to me, it's about sort of like Anna said about the environment that a student's in and sort of all the components of that environment, and getting to know what those are, and also getting to know I guess most importantly is knowing how the students and their families prioritize those components, because there's so many aspects to every individual environment that someone is in, but not everyone prioritizes the same way. And so, I think about students who, where religion might be a really big part of their, a big high priority in what they value in their life, and what are ways that I can sort of support that. And with teachers, I'm sure we've all had the eye roll with sports programming. I mean, like people, it always seems like sports, sometimes with a lot of families, they wait to schedule their lessons until they find out what the sports schedule is going to be. And, there's like some resentment. Why do we? But, the more I think about it over time, I realize that, that's another sort of culturally, that if that's important, it could be academics too. We have a lot of students here who, there's a lot of priority over academics. And instead of fighting that and sort of like, well, no, you should be prioritizing music or this or whatever, or, it's all good and it's all working towards better, like the student is sort of hopefully better off by having those priorities that they feel are important to them and that the family feels important. So I think it's worth it to not resent when someone doesn't make music the priority, but actually do the opposite and kind of support whatever it is. And if it's religion, one student may not be, and another student might be highly religious, and all of it's good. And you just want to sort of work with, like Anna said, meet them where they're at. When I think about student-led or learner-centered, and I know, like when people were talking about this years ago, in the first, or at least when I first heard it, and I remember some reactions by fellow teachers were like, "What? So now the students are teaching the students, or the students are teaching the teachers, or are they just going to run the class now?" And it's like, it's not that, but I think that initial fear response was that, oh, students are going to just like run amok and just start anything they do is okay. And it's not that to me. What it means to me is that the students get a vote and they get a voice in what happens. And I think the more when you really think about it, I mean, in the course of a lesson or the course of a class, there's so many stops along the way where if you just ask, is it possible for a student to choose something instead of me just telling them something? What can I do that will allow them to choose something and and have some kind of say in what we do? It doesn't mean that you still as sort of experts, we can kind of see where we want to go. We want, we want the student to have the right posture so that they're not tense and not whatever. But there's a lot of ways to get there. And so I think having them be involved in that is really key.
Oh, thanks. That's well.
Yeah. So I come at this a little differently than instrumental private teachers because for singing lessons, and I started out my life as a pianist. I fell into singing later on. And so the biggest difference between my very first piano lessons and my very first voice lessons was in piano, we kind of started from a very you'd work through a method book, you'd get your finger, there was a strict order of things, you'd learn to read music really fast, and then those sorts of technical things. I didn't have a teacher tell me how to relax my wrist until I was in high school. It took it took 8 years or something for that to happen. Whereas for singing, I've had students who I've had for years who music reading isn't a part of our lessons. It's all about the technique because the other stuff can be supplemented later. And you kind of start with the basis of here's how we breathe, here's how we feel things. So in order for and that's tricky because a beginner, you have a very good sense of what a beginner oboist is like. Somebody who's never touched an oboe before, what you need to teach them. For a singer, we've been using our voices our whole lives, even if we haven't been thinking about it. And so a beginner to voice lessons could be coming from any number of places. And it's not just a matter of, do you have kind of an innate, a good ear? Do you have the aptitude to pick up things quickly? It also depends, you're talking about individual family cultures. At home, is it okay for you to be weird, to make a crazy sound, to, risk looking embarrassed? What's your background with languages? Do you speak more than one language? Are you encouraged to speak more than one language? Or is it kind of are you, encouraged to do other things? It's, those sorts of things are a big part of how a student goes about developing their voice. And for me, a learner center, it's not possible to teach voice lessons without kind of having that trust from the student and having that individualized approach. I can't just get a beginner students. I've gotten 7-year-olds and 70-year-olds coming in for a first voice lesson, and you can't give them the same thing. You can't give them the same material. It doesn't really work that way. So you kind of have to do that, and you have to be able to have that kind of trust, because otherwise a student that doesn't trust you won't be able to produce the sounds that you need them to make. So it sounds like a very mercenary kind of approach, okay, first I get the student to trust me, and then that's how the voice lessons. And it's actually true. It's actually true. If you have you hear stories about people with toxic relationships with their voice teachers. It becomes very damaging to your vocal progress, and it shows up a lot faster for singers than it does for a piano teacher who has a tough but fair piano teacher, or a piano student who has a tough piano teacher. So it's kind of a process where there is always going to be that kind of give and take. That answers the question.
No, definitely. Thank you for that, Macky. Thank you for your great responses, Macky.
Yes, that was it. Everyone said most of what I wanted to say. But I guess my experience with things being culturally inclusive. So I'm Filipino, and this was my first year at the Russell teaching general music. And of course, I had to build all my lesson plans from scratch, and I wanted to really explore American folk songs. But the wall that I hit is that it was really hard to find folk songs that weren't rooted in trauma. So the route that I took is that what are the things that I know that comes from my side of the group that I can share with the students. So one of the things that my students really enjoyed is that we did a really simple melody song for New Zealand. And we actually recorded that for our CP project and all of that. And for Lunar New Year also, we did a Lunar New Year story. And it's just, there were a couple of students who never had that in their class. So just validating their experience, validating where they come from. And as for learner centered, the way I think about it is is what we are learning or how we're learning it, bringing the student joy? Is it like, because once that student experiences joy, then they're hooked. The interest is gonna come from there, they're gonna want to explore everything, and just like as teacher, like really just following that and helping guide that.
Yeah. No, thank you for that. And it's so nice to hear you all talking because you think you're saying the same thing and you're not. Like none of you is saying, but you're not approaching it the same. You're not conceptualizing it the same. And it's beautiful because it's people sometimes view this. I think to Karl's point, people view this as like it's one way, and that way is wrong. But it's actually just a lot of ways, and all of them are right. Right? If you're conceptualizing it in the appropriate way. And so all of the things that you're all describing, they don't have anything to do with each other. And so to me, that's the amazing part of it, that if we start to kind of organizationally and philosophically start to move in a direction, we all still can be creative. We can find our own way of being culturally inclusive and learner-centered, as long as we agree to do it, right? And so you all, I picked on you all because you all, once I've seen you do it, I've seen you do it, I've heard stories about the things that you have been doing, and so you were really the perfect ones to begin this conversation. I'm going to come back to you, Macky. You mentioned being in the Teaching Artist Training Institute. I'd love to know a little bit about, just briefly, what are some things that you've taken from your time in that cohort? What are some things you've taken from there and you're now using in your teaching at CMCB? But before you say it, I want to say CMCB supported your participation in the Teaching Artist Training Institute. Much like we're doing for all of our faculty, is providing professional development opportunities, not only ones we provide, but also some that you buy. And so I'd love to hear what are some things you're bringing back to us from the learnings from the Teaching Artist Training Institute.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I'm very grateful for that opportunity of being able to be part of that, because it's an amazing group of educators. So it's a group of educators from like all over the US. And what I'm really taking out of it is being a lot more intentional about how I do things or how I think about things, and just adding a reflective, having a reflection after every like lesson plan, after every activity. How did this work? Why did it work? What did I do that the student received really well? And like, how do I move forward with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, thank you. Yeah. Yeah, no, that's I'm glad you mentioned reflection, which is actually a part of our framework that we've been putting together and sharing with everyone. A key part of that is reflection, right? And making sure that that's a component of the teaching. Part of that learner-centered part of it is, part of social emotional development is being able to reflect. Like, this is what happened, having the ability to reflect on that. So I think that's a beautiful takeaway from that training. And I'm gonna come over to you. And actually, I'm going to ask you kind of two questions. One of them is you have a student you mentioned to us in our planning session that you're doing some great work with. So that's like a tactical thing that I think a lot of people want to understand, like tactically, how could it work? But also there's something that you shared, if you don't mind, and feel free to not share here, but you talked about some of your own experiences being a learner, and how you were in experiences that weren't always positive to you as a learner, and how you have kind of vowed as a teacher to be a teacher that recognizes the students and their needs, and that you then make sure that that is an important component of your own teaching. So I'd love for you to maybe kind of weave those two things together to give us a sense of what this thing can look like in practice.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I really loved what Macky said about like what I teach. I want it to bring my students joy, whatever that is. So I have a student who started with me online during the pandemic. We actually only met for the first time when she came and performed at our first women's brass department recital in like 3 years. But yeah, so she started with me online, and she had never played a wind instrument, had never been in band class or like reading like Western classical music, was not a part of her vocabulary. But she has an incredible ear, and she grew up with music being a really huge part of her church. So her family is Nigerian, and they belong to an African praise church. And this music is so ingrained in her that she has all of these songs memorized, and so there's praise songs, and there's worship songs. And she has all of these songs memorized, and she really wanted to play them at her church performance that was coming up in like a month or 6 weeks or something. And we were kind of trying to navigate how to do that, and she sent me a recording of the song that she wanted to learn how to play on the oboe, and I notated it for her, and I'm writing it out. I'm like, well, but she doesn't read music yet. Like, how do we navigate this? But she has this music. It's just such a part of her like culture and her identity that she knew it. So what we did was we wrote the words out, and we share a note in our iPhones, like you can share them and both edit them and like see each other while you're editing. So we created a note together, and she wrote out all of the words, and then I just wrote the note names underneath the words because her rhythm she had completely memorized. And the piece was in E major, which is a really difficult key on the oboe. It's 4 sharps. It's not something that I usually traditionally start people learning those notes in those keys, but she never thought about it that way because this was just the song, and these were the notes that she had to learn from that song. And she learned it completely in like 6 weeks and went and performed it. And that is just something that really, she loved doing it. And now every 2 months, she's got a whole new set of praise and worship songs. And what's really cool is that a lot of them, she'll just sing for me. So she sings them for me, and I write down the words. And then we started out with me writing out the notes for her. And as her ear has improved and she's kind of understood the relationship between what she's singing, what she's hearing, and how it feels on the instrument, now I just tell her the scale or the key that we're in and give her the starting note, and she's able to now figure out all these songs on her own. And it's really cool. It's totally different than anything else I've done. But first of all, I really enjoy learning about, this type of music and this approach, because so much of my own training and some of the other teaching that I'm doing is so based on written traditions, just because that's how the oboe traditionally has functioned, right? But it doesn't have to function that way. So it's been really good for my own ear training, first of all. It was hard at first. I haven't done that in a long time. But yeah, it's been really fun. And then she just did a praise and worship set, and at her church performance, and that was the music that we've been working on. That's what she had ready. And I was like, well, we're having a concert at CMCB. Do you want to come play that music at CMCB? She said, sure. And she came and she played a praise and worship session at our Lynn's concert, which is really awesome. So yeah, it brings her joy, and it brings me joy, like being able to help her do what she wants to do with the instrument that is my voice and is now becoming a part of her own voice, which is really cool.
That's such a beautiful story. I mean, it is, it means that what I'm so impressed by with you, the way you describe it, is with such humility, right? Like, and that is something that we're not taught to have in music school. And so to be able to like tap into that as a teacher is so amazingly impressive. Just to be able to do that, I just remember hearing about that, I was like, oh my gosh, that is a beautiful example of what our large vision could be if we all embraced it and had humility to say, I'm going to be open to what my student brings, not so much letting the students run, but being open to them and opening, we're asking them to open themselves to us. And we have to model that by the way we interact with them. And I think you did that beautifully. I want to come over to you, Hannah, because you're doing music production and songwriting, but that's not your main thing. I mean, you're a classically trained musician as well. And so I'd love to hear how you are, not only in your teaching, but also in your artistic practice. How do you like pull those two things together? This training that you got, and then now this artistic practice has now become a component of your teaching practice, right? It's like you're learning your artistic practice and teaching practice are coming together. So I'd love to hear how you think about that, how you bring that into your work with your students.
Yeah, so I love that question because it defines my journey as a musician a lot. And in terms of, I started with a classical training in piano. But at the same time, I started becoming interested on songwriting. I think I was like probably like 12 years old when I started like writing songs. And I always did it on the side, like hoping to one day, being able to record my songs, but like, thinking about like back in the 2000s, like, maybe I didn't have access to the technology that is available now. I was, I never really pursued that a lot, and I just focused on the classical music trajectory. And it wasn't until college where I got interested on joining the jazz band at my college at UMass Boston, that I started expanding my my field of not only knowledge, but like of experimenting with different genres and different styles, particularly jazz, which I have always listened to, but I never really played before. And that really opened the doors for me to like learn to improvise. And then thanks to that, I was part of a band for maybe like 5 years. And we recorded an album and we toured like all over the US. And because of the pandemic, the band broke up. So different circumstances. But yeah, so how I ended up producing my own music, I don't even know how it happened. Like I feel like I just like slowly. I've always been good with computers. Actually, during college, I was working at as a customer service for the IT department at UMass Boston. So I always knew my way around computers, and I learned on my own. I took a few like online courses, both for songwriting and music production, and it just things came together in a way that the way I can use my classical training is I can record my own strings in my music. I can make my own arrangements. I can record my own piano parts. So I'm pretty much like being able to do things that most of the time you might need to hire someone to do. And it's just very empowering to know to be able to do that, and also to be able to offer that to other people if they need it. And now bringing it into my teaching, especially teaching songwriting and music production in a classroom setting at a public school. Not everybody always knows how to play an instrument, or they aren't able to bring in their instrument and use it for their songs. But I try to show them ways to create music without necessarily knowing music notation or music theory. So it's just being really interesting to see even how my mindset about music has been colonized in the way that I have always been a fan of classical music. Like my favorite composer growing up was Tchaikovsky, and and now I still appreciate it, but I'm like, there's so many other things that growing up in Mexico, that's where I'm from, is like even my piano and my violin teachers never really introduced me to, and I never really found out till I moved here. And being immersed, especially in American culture, where everything here is made by other cultures. It's like the country of immigrants. So even it's awesome for me, and I share this with my students, to know that the music of the United States is a combination of all cultures, and that something that the United States has of its own is jazz. Like that's the one thing that I would say is like the American form of music. And I just doing that discovery for me, coming from Mexico, where maybe like we do have a strong connection with our roots, but I think like at the same time we are very like colonized in our mindset. It's awesome for me to like expand from that, and it's interesting that it took me moving to another country to make that happen.
No, I love,
Yeah.
and you touched on a key word of mine, which is decolonizing. And decolonizing the curriculum, decolonizing your own mind, right? Like something has burned its way in, and now it is taken over, and you now almost believe that it was yours. But this isn't mine. My brain has been colonized. Right? So I'm going to like decolonize my brain. I think that's a beautiful description of that. I love that word. This is great. And so We come over to you, teacher. Katie's my voice teacher. I'm taking voice lessons right now.
He's a good student.
Thank you for that. I think, one of the things that, one of the reasons that, to be honest, it was one of our first lessons that made this idea of a panel come to life for me. Because I walked in and I was ready to get the, the aria book, the opera arias, and you were like, so, what do you want to do? And I was like, have a lesson? I didn't know. You're like, what do you want to sing? I was like, well, I've got some like Stevie Wonder tunes, and they're just like, let's do that. And so we just started, I was like singing through Stevie Wonder tunes in my first lesson. And I was like, I like musical theater too. I was like, well, let's try some musical theater thing. I've got the book, we'll just go through it. You know this song, you know that song. And it was just like this this total exploration of like what I was gonna do. And I didn't know what my voice type was. I'm trying to figure that out too. And it was just really cool. I'd love for you to just like, how do you just like know how, I even sang once, is my favorite story. I sang and I read music. So I realized that I was singing the wrong pitch. And you said, no, I mean, it was just third higher, it's in the chord. And I was like, oh my gosh, I've been trained that it's wrong. Right? And you were like, no, you kept playing, it's like, yeah, it's in the chord. So I'd love to hear just a little bit about how you think about that introductory, like building that trust that you talked about.
Yeah,
How do you do that?
absolutely. I treat the first lesson like more of an interview than a lesson. Because there are things I need to know from a student when I get a voice student. I need to know, well, there's basic things like, how old they are, and what their musical background is. So can they read music? Are they taking another instrument at the same time that they're taking voice lessons? And is there like any sort of cross pollination that can happen between what I'm doing and what their instrumental teacher is doing? Do they speak another language? Is English their second language? And if it is, then what's their first language? Because that really affects how I approach what vowels we sing on. A lot depends on the student's language background. And that's the kind of thing you have to approach with counts too, because you don't want to make a student feel self-conscious about a perfectly neutral thing like their accent or what languages they speak. And in fact, like speaking a lot of languages is a huge net positive. And so I figure all that stuff out, and I ask the student, who are your favorite singers? Who do you listen to? Who would you say is like a really great singer that you like turn on Spotify and this singer's amazing? What do you want? What do you like about your voice? What are things that you want to achieve in voice lessons? Because everyone's looking for something a little bit different. And sometimes people don't really have a clear idea. Sometimes they're like, oh, I just love to sing. I'm like, okay, great. And sometimes they don't really have a strong preference about what kind of music to sing. I would say most of the voice students I get, when I ask them, okay, do you have a particular kind of thing you want to sing? Most of them say, oh, anything is fine. And then I'm like, okay, is there anything that you absolutely don't want to sing? And I've never had a student say they absolutely didn't want to sing classical stuff. But I've had some be like, okay, well, like maybe like dubstep. I'm like, okay, don't worry. We won't be I'm like, sorry, that's fine. And so then what I always have a student do is I have them break the ice by singing me some song that they know. It can be like Happy Birthday, it can be like any song. And so not every one of my students is a professional adult musician in another instrument who can just like take out a book and like start reading. So a lot of them are like racking their brains for a little bit. I'm like, okay, but it gives me a sense to see like, okay, so what are some how does the student stand when he's saying like what are immediate things that leap out to me about like what the voice does and what technical elements I want to address. And then when I think about like assigning kind of preliminary rep to a student, there's always a give and take. I always give a student a veto. I always explain why I'm assigning something if I do. Like I try to kind of like give like the fun artistic explanation like, oh, here's what this song's about. But then I'm also like, okay, we're working on the sound of music because it starts high and goes low, and I want to bring your head voice down, But I always tell a student, feel free if you don't want to sing a song, nix it. But like, when it's a kid, I'm always like, I love you to be able to tell me why you hate this song. Like, I love giving like that language to express yourself. Like, this is why I don't like this song. Okay, cool. totally fine. And usually like there's enough give and take that like it's one for me and one for you and that sort of thing, especially these last couple lessons after a recital. But yeah, it's always like that first lesson is an interview process of finding out not just like what the instrument does, but who the person is that the instrument belongs to. And it's tough because so much of we're talking about like conservatory baggage that we all have. But so much of the classical singer conservatory baggage is about treating you more like an instrument than a person. And certain instruments are more valued than others, right? Like instruments belonging to men are more valued. Instruments, you know, and bigger instruments more valued, ones that people think are more marketable. You're instantly assigned a lot more value in the conservatory setting, and it starts to feel very dehumanizing. Also, singers are kind of treated like they're not expected to be as good musicians, and they end up paying coaches and pianists because they can't teach themselves their music. They aren't given that kind of background. So I don't know. I always kind of try to start from a place of like empowering you, like not assigning labels too early, not assigning like this is your voice type, this is what you're going to sound like, but being able to kind of introduce the student to what their voice would sound like singing different styles, saying like this is the tonal ideal for like this style and that style, but it doesn't mean this is what your voice is. It means like this is the kind of image you have in your head when you're singing it, so that we kind of are more diverse as.
Oh, that's beautiful. That's such a great. I love that, like talking about the human rather than the instrument. The human rather than the art. So to your point about meeting people where they are, that's a beautiful description of that. Before we open it up to folks online, please feel free to put some questions in the chat if you have any, or to our attendees here in person. Please feel free to ask some questions. Karl, I have a question for you about repertoire. I love going to your performances, no matter what they are, no matter which group it is, because I'm guaranteed to hear a piece of music I've never heard before. I just think the way you choose repertoire is so interesting. I think you even had one of your groups compose their own piece. You're like, oh, we're gonna put these, and so I'm just wondering, when you're thinking about being that type of inclusive and also that type of learner-centered in your practice, what are you thinking about when you're thinking about like what are my groups or what are my individual students going to be playing?
It's a little harder with groups just because I can't get sort of more of an individual reaction, and we do, like when I was at the Adams, we would always take a class vote of like certain songs, and there'd often be sort of critical mass on certain hit of the day that people wanted to do. But I really do feel it's important to try to program composers of color and underrepresented composers. I just feel there's no that's sort of like that transcends all of the whatever the culturally inclusive and student led. I feel like that is something that needs to be part of it no matter what. Like even if there's like for example part of the student or the learner centered, there might be or sort of the culturally inclusive. Like I teach at another school where there's a lot of Suzuki. It's a big Suzuki. I'm not a sort of Suzuki trained teacher, but it's a huge part of the program, and all the students are friends with each other, and they a lot of times, well, their friends are doing, they're in book number 8 of book 2, and I want to be in that, so, and you want to honor that because that's what their ambition is. So that's part of the student-led approach. Like, okay, that's something that they're really into. Let's go with that, even though that may not be what I would, choose. But on the other hand, then, I don't want it to be exclusively just that, because I do want to introduce other pieces, and I think it's really important for them. So it's like kind of like a two-way street. Like, it's like student gets a vote and I get a vote too. And we're both gonna, okay, so you do Suzuki this thing, and that's great to work on, but we're also gonna do this piece that that I found or that I think you might like, or that I have you listen to 3 or 4 choices and you pick that too. So yeah, and as far as the other repertoire stuff, I really try to. I personally, in my own playing, I love to just explore new things. I know Ann and I always, you know, would talk about sort of like the obscure composers, the people that people don't know about, and you know, it was always so much fun to sort of, she knew a lot of obscure composers, and just making their voices heard too. And then the last thing is I do a lot of the students do a lot of composing for me, so I really feel like that's a great way to sort of get that idea going of them having their own voice. And I wanted to share a story just real quick, and I don't even know where it fits, but I just felt like it might actually inform something of what I do in the future. But I had a student who she was playing her piece, and she kept playing the written rhythm incorrectly. It was like she was just turning 2 quarter notes into 2 eighth notes, and you know, told her about it, and she kept doing it, and then she's like, you know what? But she ended up writing her own piece where she made that the way that she played it was doing correctly. She made it a feature of her. Where it's like, where it's like, okay, for this piece, you know, you'll play it this way, but when you compose your own, that mistake is like the right way to do it, because she wrote it. So I just thought that's a really good way to, you know, like take ownership of a mistake, but actually turn a mistake into like not a mistake. Yeah. Anyway.
That's beautiful.
If I could build on just something that Karl mentioned, which is as a performer, championing works by BIPOC composers it's very approachable and very easy, right? Like we don't have limits to the types of music that we can play or how difficult it is. And she was plugged again, which that's about to be performing, which you can also view on Zoom. You know, a reed quintet is it's a new genre, that type of instrumental ensemble, which is clarinet, bass clarinet, saxophone, bassoon, and oboe, has only existed since the 1980s, and there isn't a lot of original repertoire for that ensemble. So part of what we are doing is commissioning a lot of works, writing a lot of grants to expand the repertoire, and we're making sure that the composers that we are commissioning are composers of color, female, and non-binary composers. So, you know, as a performer, we have the time, the resources, and the ability to access all of these incredible artists and composers. What's much more difficult is, as a teacher, finding repertoire that is culturally inclusive in that way, for 2 reasons. Part of it is our own training has not looked like that, right? We don't know this music. It wasn't a part of typical conservatory training. So we have blind spots, right? You know, you teach what you know. It's like, oh, this piece would be great for you because this is the level that you're at. Do you connect with this piece? Do you like it? Great. I'm gonna go to Sing Song Sonata. It's beautiful. Oh, white dead guy. It's a great piece. And the amount of time and money that it takes to expand your own knowledge is a barrier. So that is something, you know, just owning my own area of growth that I'm hoping to expand on the next year, is just exploring that, because that music is out there. It's not like there's 0 pieces written for oboe by Black composers. Like, that's not true, but I don't know it, and I haven't found it, and I haven't analyzed it, and I haven't figured out, oh, this piece would be great for this type of student because they're working on this skill level. So that becomes much more challenging. But Hannah and I and another CMCB instructor, Sebastian, are part of this really amazing fellowship through the Massachusetts Arts Cultural Council. I think that's it. And it's called the Meta Fellowship, which is music educators and teaching artists all throughout Massachusetts. And it's a 2-year fellowship, and our first year of fellowship is, you know, training and meetings and professional development, and the second year is all project-based. And Hannah and Sebastian and I kind of share this passion for wanting to expand not only our own teaching knowledge, but also the teaching knowledge of other people, and really trying to research and develop some sort of online catalog or database where you can find this music, and also kind of like what level of student and where it might kind of fit into like different types of pedagogy.
I love that. And I think that also, as, you're talking about the systems that you exist in, and you're also you're putting me on notes, like Napoleon, do better, right? No, I'm serious, like, get better revenue, right? Like, we what's in the library? How are you ensuring that we have the resources that we need in order to be able to do these things? At least that's the way I'm internalizing that, is that you're putting me and Morgan and our staff on notice that, hey, we're now asking the question. So now we're asking the question that you need to solve. Right, and so I hear it.
Well,
Loud and clear.
I'm taking it more on myself, like I don't have knowledge of this repertoire, and
Mhm.
like you said, part of it's not existing in the system, but I also haven't done that work yet.
Mhm. Yes.
And we're all looking forward to doing that type of work.
Yes.
But yeah, if we'll send you repertoire
Get
guys,
ready.
it's coming.
I'm ready. I want to see if I know we ran over a little bit, but it's such important things you all were saying. It was worth the time. Does anyone, anything in the chat, any questions? Okay.
Yeah, we just have one question in
Sure.
the chat. So, this person asked, or spoke about how the panel has already spoken briefly about reflecting from your point of view as a teacher. And Brenda was curious about what you're hearing from the students and, what that opportunity for student reflection on the music and the learning experience has been like.
Yeah, that's a great question. What are you hearing from your students as part of their own reflection of what you're doing to them?
So
Please, Brenda.
for my last class, I actually have like a little secret student survey for my little kids. So we're doing a story, or read aloud called Because Big Mobilums. So wonderful, wonderful story, like a butterfly effect of like, because their uncle got sick, they went to a concert, they really loved the music from the concert, and they grew up into a conductor. That's a really great book. And
Stop
so.
being a musician?
Hmm?
Sorry. I said they stopped being a musician. I'm sorry.
You know that.
Terrible. It was an easy one. It was an easy one. I'm sorry.
So my plan is to have like an activity sheet that says, so every single sentence in that storybook starts with because of blah, 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 blah. So my activity sheet is gonna be because of music class this year, I got that. And then it's an open prompt. And at the back of it, because it's our last class, what do you want to say to Miss Macky is about music class? So just like keeping it really open.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome. Anyone else on the reflection side? Is there some things you heard from students?
I'll say something, I'll just, kind of tie back and say, well, here in the land of voice. But kind of something I try to impart to my students. I talked a little bit about like, empowering them to not be kind of like, treated as a voice instead of a person. And part of that is another one of those kind of things with voice lessons, which is that I can't see you playing your instrument, like the big difference, right? Basically, it's a bunch of kind of educated guesswork, ignored by science. I promise. And but I can't like I can't like go inside and play your lyrics for you. You kind of have to do it yourself, and you have to be able to sense, when you make a change and be able to kind of explain it, not necessarily to me, but to yourself, because at the end of the day, what I kind of tell my students is that you are your own voice teacher, and I'm kind of teaching you how to be your own teacher. And so I'm always asking, this is my catchphrase is, what was the change you made? What was the difference you felt? And so always making them kind of, like that right after. So like, I don't know, I think that's kind of like a big kind of, it seems like a very basic like technique thing, but it's like actually constantly kind of asking for that kind of reflection during the lesson, I think is very helpful, because a lot of times students I get students who aren't very used to like having that kind of back and forth with the teacher, like younger students especially. They're used to kind of a teacher being like, okay, do it like this, and then like the teacher is like, okay, so like why don't you talk to me a little bit? It's a different experience for them. So I'm probably all the same for instrumental lessons too, but that's kind of what I
mean, it's also a really good way of just building their vocabulary. And it makes it easier to
Absolutely.
learn too.
It does, and sometimes like students surprise me with what they say, like the words that come out of there, especially like when I get younger children who don't have like a lot of the kind of musical vocabulary or the kind of physical vocabulary. I was talking about like keeping like a vertical space in the mouth for like, this is like years ago, a 10-year-old kid, and she's like, oh, it's like my back mouth is always open, but my front mouth can do whatever. I'm like, that's so great. I had another 10-year-old yesterday in the lesson, you know, talking about like taking in less air, and I was saying this to you in her lesson, this was 6, she was feeling the same thing. But she took in less air, like we use less air, and she's like, oh, it's like, I didn't have to make a whole, like, my body didn't have to make a whole production out of it. And I was like, that's great, I love it, I'm gonna use it. And so I'm plagiarizing from children, that's how I work. That's what we do here.
That's bi-directional, that's a bi-directional relationship. Any other questions in the chat?
Yeah, it's just about 7, so.
Oh, look at that.
Yeah.
Well, I want to please a round of applause for our amazing panelists. Absolutely, I knew this was going to be fun. We have a good time chopping it up together, and that's what we did. So thank you all for being so honest. And you know, anytime you're on a panel, it's a vulnerable time, and so I want to thank you for allowing this to be a safe space for you and being so vulnerable and honest about the things that you're working on and the things that you're proud of and those sorts of things. I really want to thank you all for that. And thank you all. Thanks everyone for coming as well. Thank you for those who are in person, but also to you that are online. Thank you for coming as well. Again, as I've been saying for months now, really the future is now. The things that we're talking about doing in the future here at CMCB are literally happening right now. And if you're not familiar with us, I hope you will come in and see a little bit of our future. And for those of you who've been with us for a while and hear me talk about it, see, I told you, we're already doing it. But anyway, again, thank you all. You're absolutely amazing. And again, thanks everyone for coming. And please stick around for the performance. They're probably going to take a little bit of time to, you're going to want to warm up for sure. Take a little bit of time to get set up, but please stick around for the performance. I'm sure it's going to be lovely. But again, thanks again. And please come and be with us at CMCB. Thanks, everyone.